Hi, I'm Neil Brown, alongside the White Brothers.
Ethan.
And Bradley.
This is Crash Course.
And today we're going to be talking about trade routes.
In the Eastern Hemisphere.
First, let's talk about trade in the Indian Ocean. Trade in the Indian Ocean caused specialization in products and links between both various regions of India and other lands. Now onto the monsoons. Because India was a large agricultural society, irrigation and coordination with the monsoons was essential. In spring and summer, warm, moist air blew from the southwest, causing rainfall. In fall and winter, however, cool, dry air blew from the northeast. While crops were watered naturally during spring and summer, irrigation had to take place during fall and winter. Unfortunately, little rain during spring and summer caused disaster in the area.
Dhows and junks. Concerning the monsoons, sailors recognized the pattern and sailed in stages so that the winds would always move them where they wanted to go. During the trips, the different merchants and people in the area sailed on very large ships. The dhows, which were favored by Arab, Persian, and Indian sailors, could hold cargo of about 100 tons in 1000 and 400 tons in 1500. The Chinese and Southeast Asian junks sailed the area and could sometimes hold 1,000 tons. With all this cargo, storage places for the products were vital.
Now, on to Emporia. India was a natural site for emporia and warehouses because it stood in the middle of the Indian Ocean basin. Merchants from Africa or Persia stopped by Indian ports to exchange their cargoes for goods to take back west with them on the winter monsoon. Southeast Asian and Chinese merchants stopped by Indian ports to trade their cargoes for goods to ship east with them on the summer monsoon. As a result, the sea lanes in Emporia of the Indian Ocean basin made up a network of maritime silk roads, a web of transportation, communication, and exchange that complemented the land-based silk roads and promoted interaction between peoples throughout much of the Eastern Hemisphere.
Okay, now let's talk about specialized production. Because trade expanded in volume, specialized production increased in the lands around the Indian Ocean basin. Indian artisans made fine cotton textiles for centuries, but they only produced them in small quantities. But as the demand for cotton textiles increased, artisans built local industries to respond to that demand. The industries made the Indian economy better and also allowed for other specialized industries to emerge, such as sugar refining, leather tanning, stone carving, and carpet weaving. Iron and steel production were also very prominent.
The Indian Ocean trade and Islamic states in East Africa. Coastal East Africa was not an abandoned place with no interaction with the rest of the world. Indian and Persian sailors visited the coast after 500 BCE. After the late centuries BCE, Malay sailors traveled westward in the Indian Ocean and had established colonies in Madagascar by the 4th and 5th centuries. However, those early African populations composed of hunter-gatherer societies, so they couldn't trade products with them.
Now, on to Kilwa. Starting around 800 CE, one of the soon-to-be busiest city-states in East Africa emerged, Kilwa. By the 1300s, it extensively imported cotton, silk, perfumes, and pearls from India, along with porcelain from China. Gold, slaves, and ivory were obtained internally and traded for foreign products. Exporting a ton of gold each year, by the late 15th century, Kilwa was involved in major participation with Indian Ocean trade.
Okay, now let's talk about Zimbabwe. Like Kilwa, Great Zimbabwe was involved with commercial exchanges along the East African coast. Gold, ivory, slaves, and other local commodities were supplied to the coast for trading. Furthermore, the kings managed and taxed the trade between the regions. By profiting handsomely from all the trading, they were able to finance the building of larger states and empires. In addition, the kings created alliances with other leaders.
Now for cultural exchanges. During the 11th century, the magnetic compass spread across the Indian Ocean from China. By the mid-12th century, Europeans began using it. The compass allowed sea trade to further expand because navigators could be more confident in their abilities to return home.
Now, let's talk about Hinduism in Southeast Asia. Hinduism traveled along the Indian Ocean into Southeast Asia by way of the merchants. The cultural traditions were transferred so much that the Southeast Asian rulers started to call themselves Rajas, aka kings, and started to communicate in Sanskrit. Religious cults devoted to the Hindu gods formed. Architecture was based on Indian style, and the Southeast Asians tried to practice honorable religious traditions.
Okay, patterns of long-distance trade. Two principal routes were available for products. Items that were large and bulky were transported on ships along the Indian Ocean to keep transport costs from affecting the profit. On the contrary, items that had a high value compared to their mass were profitably traded over land routes such as the Silk Roads.
Now let's talk about overland trade routes. The Silk Roads connected the ends of Eurasia from China to the Roman Empire.
Let's talk about sea lanes and maritime trade. The Silk Roads extended into an interconnected web of sea travel. Routes from the South China Sea joined East Asia with Southeast Asia and southern India. Then, the routes from India connected to Arabia and into the Mediterranean, an already busy and well-developed network for sea travel.
Okay, now on to trade goods. Many different goods traveled throughout the Silk Roads. Silk and spices traveled west from East and South Asia, westward to Arabia and the Roman Empire. Further identifying the creation of products, silk originated in China, where cultivators had mastered the techniques of developing fine silk. Fine spices all emerged from Southeast Asia. Various other spices like cinnamon, pepper, and oil came from the same general areas. These spices had great significance because they had many special uses that we don't really use today. Strong horses and jade were produced in Central Asia. The Roman Empire produced many decorative products along with linens, iron tools, olive oil, wine, and bullion of precious metals. Mediterranean merchants added value to gemstones by making them into better products and exporting them. Many merchants and diplomats during the classical times made long journeys across the entire landmass that was involved in the trade.
Buddhism was strongly rooted in North India, especially when the popularization by Emperor Ashoka. Buddhism subtly traveled along the Silk Roads to Iran, Central Asia, China, and Southeast Asia. When Buddhist merchants traveled, they practiced their religion among themselves, but spread it by explaining it to others. The spread was especially prominent in oases along the Silk Roads, which heavily relied on the trade from the merchants. Therefore, the communities allowed the Buddhist merchants to build monasteries and invite religious people into the communities. Consequently, the residents adopted the religion. Nomadic people further spread Buddhism throughout Central Asia and China because they traded with the communities and found Buddhism intriguing. Buddhism even became available in China, especially among foreign merchants. It did not immediately attract native Chinese but began to become popular in the 5th century.
Now let's talk about the spread of Manichaeism. Buddhism and Hinduism weren't the only religions that spread along the Silk Road. The spread of Manichaeism, which is a mixture of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Buddhism, revealed how well missionary religions made the use of Silk Roads.
Now for the spread of epidemic disease. As well as being a route to distribute religion, the Silk Road was also a means of transmitting disease. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and the bubonic plague were spread across the Silk Road. The Roman Empire's population decreased greatly because of diseases spread throughout the regions.
Let's talk about our favorite animal, the camel. Because camels were able to travel long distances without needing water, they were the perfect animal for trans-Saharan trade. Caravans took 70 to 90 days to cross the desert, and special saddles were sometimes used on camels and sped up the travel time.
So, now let's talk about the Kingdom of Ghana. Ghana was the main kingdom in Western Africa when the Muslims arrived to the area. There was a total of 22 kings who ruled in Ghana before the Hijra of Muhammad. Farmers and cultivators fought against raiders who rode on camels.
Let's talk about gold trade. Ghana soon became the busiest site in all of West Africa for one reason: gold. This precious metal was in such high demand that Muslim merchants came all the way from the Mediterranean in search of it. Unusually, Ghana didn't produce its own gold. The kings received the gold from regions in the south. However, Ghana produced ivory and slaves, and, in return, they received horses, cloth, small manufactured wares, and salt.
On to Kumbai-Sile. Ghana's main trading town and capital was Kumbai-Sile. The population was 15 to 20,000, and it was a city with buildings made of stone and numerous mosques. The kings were able to afford a large army to protect the gold with all the taxes levied on trade.
Okay, so now let's talk about Islam in West Africa. By the 10th century, the kings of Ghana had converted to Islam. The king's conversion improved relations with Muslim merchants and Muslim nomads. It also brought them support from Muslims in North Africa. The kings did not want to force Islam, unlike other kings, nor did they accept Islam for only their own uses. They instead continued to observe other religious customs. Without even having to force Islam, the faith still attracted people, especially those who traded with Muslim merchants.
Now for the Mali Empire and trade. Mali benefited from trans-Saharan trade more than Ghana. From the 13th to the 15th century, Mali controlled West African trade. The capital at Niani attracted merchants who wanted to participate in the gold trade and market cities on the caravan paths. Like the later kings of Ghana, Mali rulers praised Islam and provided protection and housing. They did not force Islam on their people, yet they encouraged its voluntary adoption.
Now on to Mansa Musa and Islam. Mansa Musa took Islam very seriously. In trading cities, he erected mosques and dispatched students to North Africa to study with Islamic intellects. Not only did he send his people to learn Islamic teachings, but he also created religious schools in Mali and requested Islamic teachers. Not long after his rule, the Mali Empire collapsed. However, the traditions that he set in place guaranteed religiously that Islam would remain prominent in West Africa and that the surrounding states would recognize the economic viability of the area concerning trade.
On to slave trading. Once the demand for slaves grew too large, slaves started to be traded from Africa instead of Europe, which was from where they were usually traded. Rulers of powerful societies started to attack kin-based societies in search of slaves to trade.
Now, let's talk about the spread of crops. Foods that enrich diets, such as citrus fruits and rice, were introduced to sub-Saharan Africa through long-distance trade. Cotton was introduced to West Africa and became popular among the wealthy.
Okay, so now let's talk about sugarcane. Muslim merchants started large-scale cultivation of sugarcane and were very important in the widespread distribution of it. Once it was introduced to the Europeans, they instantly became huge fans and loved it, and they even organized plantations to grow sugar.
In conclusion, because of the increased interconnectedness of the Indian Ocean trade routes, Silk Roads, and Trans-Saharan trade, regions began to specialize in products, and cultural ideas, such as religion, were spread throughout the Eastern Hemisphere.
YOLO swag, everyone!
Unless you're a Hindu.
Thanks for watching. See you next time on Crash Course.